I'm board speaker tonight. We have Bob Gedert, and he is the past president of the National Recycling Coalition, past president of the Solid Waste Service Department in Austin, Texas, and actually started a single-use plastic bag ban when he was in there. What year was that, Bob?
2014.
Well, they have a ban and it's still there. So Bob knows a lot about recycling and landfills, and I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Marie. And X is the spot where I'm to stand here. And I welcome those in person, but also those on Zoom as well. And there's a lot of familiar faces here too. And I thank Sierra Club for the invitation. I'm a proud member of Sierra Club, and as I traveled through my 45-year career, I've been a member of Sierra Club in many states, Ohio, Indiana, California, and Texas. And believe it or not, Texas has a very strong Sierra Club. So fighting the in Texas. So, but recently moving back to Cincinnati, I've been an active member of the Past Plastic at Sierra Club. Many of you are familiar with my face.
Settings window, press any key on the keyboard to hear the name of that key. Press caps lock plus F1 to review the full set of narrator. Narrator 1 running window button. Narrator setting window, press any key. Narrator setting, exiting narrator.
I'll let the IT specialist figure that one out. But we'll ready to start the PowerPoint whenever you're ready there.
Not sure what that was.
Yeah, neither of us. So my PowerPoint today and my presentation is what citizens should know about landfill design and best practices. And I will begin by telling you that I am not pro landfill. I am anti-landfill as I speak on this subject. So it gives you a little bit of understanding of my bias on the topic. And I will talk a bit about landfills and their design and their best practices, but also alternatives to landfills. That's the part I really want to get to. Most importantly, it's important for citizens to understand the elements of landfill if you are anti-landfill. It's interesting and most important to know professional terminology and the reasons why we have landfills. And so, next slide. My PowerPoint is split in 4 sections: the history of municipal solid waste management, which leads us to landfill. What we should know about landfill design and best practices, what citizens should know about landfill defects. That gets real interesting. And then what citizens should know about landfill alternatives. Now, the first 2 parts, I'm going to spin through fairly quickly. I don't think we need to dwell too long on the history and the landfill design and best. But it's good background material, good info for you. And anybody that wants a copy of this PowerPoint is welcome to talk to me or talk to the leadership of the Sierra Club, and we can forward the PowerPoint to you. But because there's some good information in here, if you want to dig into that information. So go ahead. I'm going to talk very quickly, slide through some slides here about the history of solid waste management. I have a 45-year career in solid waste and recycling, mostly leaning on the recycling side. And part of my career is I taught a history of solid waste at Yale University for 2 summers. And it was kind of an interesting class to kind of dig in to where we learned and started the history of dumping our waste somewhere. And so go ahead. So we, the history through ancient history up to our current century. Go ahead, next slide. And we had changes in our purpose, our responsibility, changes in our waste stream, changes in our collection methods, changes in our disposal, changes in our diversion away from our over the centuries, over the time period. Next slide. So way back in BC, back in time, won't vary in numbers, but in Athens, Greece, as well as in China, ancient China, the responsible agent of waste disposal was the individual, and the waste composition was real simple: ash and pottery, broken tools, spoiled food. And we buried it in soil. And some of our ancient Indian populations, Native Americans populations, you can find in our excavations some of the evidence of this as well too. And most importantly, nearly everything was repaired or reused in those ancient BC civilizations. And some evidence of that in some excavations and so forth. Next slide. So moving forward into the Middle Ages, and most important element of change in waste collection was disease and rodent carrion diseases. And when we got into that, we still had unmanaged collection. And the individual was responsible, but and we still have the same primitive collection. We had fairly primitive, and no organized collection, but we started to deal with the spread of disease and connecting the spread of disease to our waste disposal. And some of the major cities like London and Paris and some of the European cities started to deal with burning and burying and piling waste away from the populations. And that was the beginning of organized burning of waste and adding to our air pollution and adding to our water pollution. The trigger was rodents, rats, spreading disease. And there was a health connection to the waste that we were depositing around our. Next slide. We got that Black Death, the European tour of the Black Death. Next slide. So the Industrial Revolution, we're jumping centuries again. That was the next major, some say innovation, I would say devolution of our waste collection, in scavenger collection. And that is that our products and such became a little bit more advanced, and we had what I call the devolution, instead of individuals being more responsible, individuals started street dumping in the curbs of the street and letting somebody else take care of it. Oh, those scavengers will take care of our waste. Somebody else of a lower class will start taking care of our waste. That started to become the working attitude in major cities, not the rural areas. In the rural areas, dig a pit and bury your waste in a pit in the rural areas. In the cities, the gutter of the curb, it's just right along there. And if we had a major rainstorm, the waters will wash it out to the nearest stream. Yes.
Your slide says diversion. What happened to that diversion?
The diversion, very good question. Diversion at that time was through the scavengers. And the scavenger, that's the plus side. The negative side, as I was speaking, pulling it down on the curb and the gutter and rainstorms washing it through the water systems and such. If the scavengers got it before the rain, and and before the rodents carried away a lot of the food waste and so forth, the scavengers recycled glass, metal, paper, textiles, charcoal, wood, brick. There was a lot of recycling going on. There was no statistics gathered. Some of the historians that I spoke on, I got to watch my acts here. Some historians that I've researched on the history estimate the recycling rate in major cities like Boston, in the late 1800s, 18th century, 19th century, early 19th century, somewhere around 50% recycling rate, which we're nowhere near in today's world. Nowhere near in today's, and that's because we, at that time, they recycled a larger array of materials. And you know, think about the recycling of brick and wood and charcoal. And much of these materials are pretty heavy, and the people would dump them at the curb, and scavengers would come along, pick it up. No charge to the residents, no fee basis. They would come and take them to construction yards and get a fee to sell them the bricks to a construction yard. And charcoal to various different wood companies to resell as wood burning charcoal. And so there's a secondary economy there. Next slide. Some examples and some of our the picture up in the upper left with the white uniform comes from London, and this was transported. This concept was transported to the U.S. In the 1930s, but was first in London to dress up our scavengers who were generally at first not paid in white uniforms, give them white uniforms so that they were prettier to the visitors and to the elites of the city. And they would go down the street with these carts and they were given brooms to clean the gutters and to clean the junk, as well as pick up all the scavenged material that they found profitable to themselves. And eventually, these scavengers became sanitation workers for the city. It became employees of the city. Eventually, it turned over into a sanitation worker setup. And you could, go ahead. So, you know, you get into the organized municipal sanitation workers. And that's when we became into a paid employment situation. And the first labor unions, municipal government labor unions came into play for setting work standards. The first hourly standards for sanitation workers were 60 hours a week and moved down to 40 hours eventually. But now sanitation workers are working about 45, 50 hours a week in many cities. But they became standardized systems of work through the unions. Products, waste compositions changed over time, became more complex as the products became more complex. Today's world, a lot more electronics and a lot more hazards in the work stream, but still pretty simple in the early 20th century. We had managed dumps before we had landfills. We had managed dumps, and there are holes in the ground managed by the municipality outside the city limits. Generally, city residents never saw the dump. And diversion still pretty high on the glass, metal, paper, textiles, charcoal, wood, and these sanitation workers had the privilege at that time, even though city employees, they had the privilege of taking the material that could be diverted home with them and sell them. They weren't city property at the time. They are now, but at that time they could recycle the material on their side jobs at that time. Next slide. And you see some old equipment that that was utilized, and in the chart on the bottom, inorganics, purple, products, green. You can see the explosion of products in our waste stream over time from 1900 to 1960 to 2000. Extremely important to understand that our waste stream has become more toxic as we've increased the amount of products in our waste stream.
When you say products, would you describe that, please?
Yes, And products is anything that you throw away that you have utilized in the form of like toys or packaging. Packaging is part of products. They didn't have packaging 50, 60 years ago. They do now. But the computer that you're using is a product. The glass that you drink from is a product. Products is a pretty large category. The clock on the wall is a product. A candle is a product. That plate is a product. Is a product. So it's a pretty large category of items. Yeah, next slide. And so the late 20th century, which we're mostly familiar with, late 1900s, we call it integrated waste management. That's where we start to introduce recycling at the curb, waste collection, and containerizing items. We start to say, you got to put things in a container, you got to put recycling in one container, trash in another container. And we have organized municipal solid waste workers. We also have private collection workers in some cities, municipal solid waste workers in another city. We have a lot of discarded products, hazardous waste, food, electronics. Collection is street curbside collection. That's the assumption. Rural areas that aren't as organized kind of get left out of the picture. We might have drop-off recycling, or such. Rural areas are required to contract for their waste, but it's less economic to have that curbside collection. And so rural communities have to fend for themselves in a sense for their own solid waste disposal. Many states ban the disposal of waste on their own land. So a lot of farmers and rural communities cannot dispose of waste on their own property. And that kind of requires a farmer or a rural area that economically cannot contract for curbside recycling to drive their waste to the nearest dump. So there's driving required. And the common disposal across the country is sanitary landfills. That's where we get the term first time we used the sanitary landfill was 1970. That's where that term came from, 1970. And ocean dumping became very large practice in the 1970s and 1980s.
What does that mean, sanitary?
Sanitary is a term invented by the US EPA, by the very first administrator of US EPA. And the administrator, Ruckelhaus, said, we will only have sanitary landfills for 20 to 30 years because we will be innovative in finding better ways to handle our waste. That was in 1970.
So it doesn't mean anything, it's just rhetoric?
Yeah.
Strike again?
I would agree with that statement. I think there was intent in the term sanitary in that it's better designed landfills than open dumps. That was the intent of the word sanitary. I myself would not put much behind the term sanitary these days.
Previous to this,
Open dumps, a hole in the ground, and when it reached level ground, filled on the top and dig another hole. Open dumps generally did not mound up above surface level. Generally, cities would put parks on top of those open dumps, or parking lots and build a shopping center.
look at my house.
Sometimes housing developments were built over open dumps. Yeah, that's very common. Hamilton County here has a list of all previous open dumps, and they are monitoring those for methane emissions. And you can go online and see where they are. There's more than 100 previous closed landfills, what we would call open dumps, within Hamilton County. And many of them have shopping centers or housing developments over them.
There's some locations capture that methane and use it.
In generally not, in general, it's released to the atmosphere in general.
Yeah.
It's generally unmitigated releases to the environment. But the issue is to not allow the methane to be constricted and into an enclosed space to create a hazard to the local area. So there's monitoring. Yeah, next slide. So we get into the 21st century. There's some methods of collection, containerized trucks, newer trucks, and so forth. Next slide. So we get into this century, and we start to call it in many communities, not necessarily our own community, but across the country, we start to change our terminology to materials management. And the idea of terminology changing is the hopeful wish that we might be moving away from landfills. The hopeful wish, and it's more a wish than a reality. But we're trying to turn the corner. We call it materials management, and many of us in the field try to call it sustainable materials management, trying to put the sustainability behind that action. And some areas we call resource recovery rather than solid waste collection. Solid waste collection means your mission is to collect waste and find a way to dispose of it. Resource recovery, if that's your mission, is to recover resources and find places for it, whether it be recycling, reuse, or composting. So it's a change in mission. And you can see the same waste composition, the same collection, same disposal methods that are happening out there, but diversion is the emphasis. The diversion is the turning point. Next slide there. So the emphasis, sustainable materials management, is moving from a linear economy to a recycling economy as an intermediate, and the eventual goal, a circular economy. But we're not there yet. We're kind of in between the linear economy and the recycling economy right now to most of the nation in the major cities. Next slide. So the direction: past sanitation, waste collection, recent integrated waste management, which I would label Cincinnati in that category of integrated waste management, and the new direction of sustainable materials management with a zero waste goal. And Cincinnati's green plan it has a zero waste goal in it. Are we there yet? No, we're not, but we're reaching in that direction. Next slide. So landfill design and best practices. And given that I spent some time to give you that context, I'm going to try to move faster in this section, given that you can get access to this slide presentation if you desire to know these details in depth. So, because there's a lot of links in this section here. So I'll be speaking on federal landfill regulations, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, integration of federal regulations, state EPA regulations, and the local solid waste district regulation. The compaction of all of this information gives you a little background on how you can fight the growth of landfills and work on alternatives to landfills. Next slide. So the beginning of federal landfill regulations is the RCRA regulations, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which I have been involved in rewriting that over the decades, from the 1980s and 1990s. I've been involved in trying to support rewriting some of these rules, but they are written into federal code and adopted by Congress. And that's the backbone of landfill regulations. Each state is then required to implement these regulations, and each state environmental agency is given authority for enforcement. And in Ohio, our enforcement agency is Ohio EPA. So the regs come from the federal government. US EPA gives guidance on the federal rules, and then the enforcement and oversight comes from Ohio EPA. That's the lines of authority. And yes, well, let's run on that on this. So the important point on this is pose a reasonable probability of adverse effects on health or the environment. That's the authority Congress gave for disseminating regulations at the federal level. If it has adverse effects on health or the environment. Key point for any challenge of a landfill is it posing an adverse effect on health or the environment. That's your starting point there. Next slide. Also in the federal regulations, they regulate small quantity generators of waste and non-municipal hazardous waste. And that those materials do go to our local landfills. Our local landfills receive that the small quantity, not the large quantity generator of hazardous waste. That goes to specialized landfills, but small quantity generator of, and there's specific definitions that are in code. So I just want to note that some hazardous materials go to local landfills. Next. There's also sewage sludge regulations that disseminate from the record regulations from the federal code. Next slide. Interesting point, and I'll get to this in a few slides later. That there's restrictions from the federal government on municipal solid waste landfills, public airports nearby, floodplains, wetlands, faults, seismic impact zones, unstable areas, and the closure of existing municipal landfills. I've been involved in closing the St. Mary's landfill in St. Mary's, Ohio, the Fresno landfill in Fresno, California, and the Austin landfill in Austin, Texas. And most recent numbers for the Austin landfill closure, which is about the size of the Rumpke landfill. It's not about 3/4 the size of the Rumpke landfill in Colerain Township. The Austin landfill closure costs $3 million a year for the next 30 years. That's the closure cost to the city of Austin, $3 million a year for the next 30 years. Post-closure costs of a landfill is required by federal law for 30 years from the time point of closure. And there are specific activities the city has to take on that closure. St. Mary's landfill was operated by a private operator. Private operator closed up shop and said, I'm out of here. And so the city of St. Mary's is responsible for that post-closure care for 30 years, even though it's a privately operated landfill. 30-year post-closure care. So there's a lot involved in it. Seismic impact zones I'll come back to in a few slides. Next slide. Federal regulations include cover material requirements over the landfill, the top of the landfill, vector control, explosive gas control, that's methane collection, air criteria, that's the Clean Air Act, access requirements of runoff and control systems, surface water requirements, that's the Clean Water Act, impacts, liquid restrictions, and record keeping. All of those, if you can access record keeping of a local landfill and monitor their compliance with these federal regulations. Next slide. There's regulations on lateral expansions. Interesting enough, there's no federal regulations on height restrictions of landfills. So that's a state regulation. There's no federal regulation on the height. And water monitoring and corrective action is regulations. And I mentioned the closure plan and the 30-year post. Regulation. And each landfill, as it's operating, has to provide a financial assurance and the ability to finance post-closure care and to finance any need for corrective action. So every landfill operator has to provide that assurance every single year. So in Ohio, they have to provide that assurance to Ohio EPA and provide that document once a year. Ohio EPA enforces these regulations. And I would say, underline, in theory. Question in the back.
Anyway, private land, build people that are acceptable. Make sure that.
The question is, the private operators have money up front to make sure that these post-closure areas it's sterile. The answer is no. The state actually provides a list of what is called financial assurance for the post-closure care. The state of Ohio has a longer list of what that means. And that could be a trust fund, that could be a bond, that could be an insurance package, many different ways they could provide financial assurance. That generally does not mean money in the bank. So, and so I've seen financial assurance differently in various different states. And I would say Ohio's definition is very, very weak from my perspective.
It does take
Yes, and federal law. It's a matter of enforcement state by state, and some states have different measures of enforcement and definitions.
So I was wondering how not covering that.
The St. Mary's situation ended up in a lawsuit where the city lost the lawsuit. How? I don't know. And I was working for the county that governs over that, and so that was amazing. Lawsuit ended up the way it did. Absolutely amazing. Yeah. One last question, and then I really should move.
Zoom audience. What does control mean?
Control is an interesting topic. It's a very broad topic. I originally thought it meant rats and mice and really little animals that can spread disease. It actually is defined that include birds and cats and dogs and other animals as well. Any type of animal that it interferes with the operation of the landfill or comes onto the property of the landfill that is unwelcomed. It's unwelcome guest.
Are those rats again?
Yes. Yes. And any of those animals can pick up a disease and carry it into the neighborhoods. And that's the concern.
They're sanitary rats?
It could be those sanitary rats. Next slide. So regulations that I've been speaking about, there's a common link that you can go to and see all those regulations. They do get changed every 4 or 5 years, and there's a lot of lobbyists that lobby Congress to change those regulations. I can tell you they've been diluted over the recent years. Next slide. Clean Air Act. Just a note, Clean Air Act overlaps the federal regulations and has been quoted in enforcement of landfill regulations. Landfill operators are required to submit a Title V air permit under the Clean Air Act requirements. Small landfills are exempt from Title V, but that's actually a very, very small exemption. And if you're familiar with Bond Road landfill, which I'll mention later on, that is a large enough landfill to require a Title V permit. That's not too small to be exempt. So air permits are required. And the issue with air permits is primarily the requirement of gas monitoring at the landfill and making sure there's an adequate amount of gas monitoring and a certain level of gas monitoring kicks in gas collection. What they do with the gas is another issue. And those regulations have been weakened lately. So next, Clean Water Act of 1972, landfill operators are required to submit an NPDES permit under the Clean Water Act. Most landfill operators do have a permit, and what the permit permits them to do is collect leachate. Leachate is water that's contaminated. It has been in touch with the waste and is contaminated waste water that they collect that and then take that to a wastewater treatment plant for treatment to meet the Clean Water Act standards. It is very common practice for a landfill operator to work hand in hand with a wastewater treatment facility. Larger landfills, very common in Michigan or Illinois, for large landfills to have to build their own wastewater treatment facility right on the property of the landfill. That's a common practice in other states, not common in Ohio. Next slide. The integration of federal regulations. In other words, if there's regulations like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and other environmental regulations, they must be integrated and not in conflict with each other. They must be integrated and enforced. Next slide. And again, another quote, there should be a formal means of coordination established between federal agencies for the coordination of these regulations. Yes. And another slide stating the same thing, basically. Hold on just a second. I think my commentary is the last two bullets there. And I just want to throw in a little bit of commentary regarding the Bond Road landfill. And some of you know what I mean by that, some don't. Bond Road landfill is a newly constructed landfill on the far western side of Hamilton County, adjacent to the Indiana border in, what township is that? Whitewater Township, thank you. Thank you. And it is a landfill that has been permitted to accept 1,500 tons a day.
Yes.
1,500, but looking at Tim, my expert. 1,500 tons a day, which is a fairly large increase from its previous usage. And it is a very old landfill, the previous dump of Monsanto, when they had a plastics plant in Addison. And it has been reconstructed to accept municipal waste and commercial waste at that landfill at 1,500 tons a day, which is a fairly large flow of waste. That landfill, we've been looking over the records of EPA's, the Ohio EPA's permitting process. My commentary, I believe that they have not required an overlay and integration of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. I believe that they have not followed those regulations, and we're challenging that through some court procedures. And this has been recognized by Ohio EPA, actually a written document that recognizes that. Yet I do not yet see the significance of the Clean Water Act being applied to the concerns of the community raised regarding water runoff and leachate breakouts when objecting to local landfill operations. So it's an issue that we're raising. The unresolved, totally unresolved. State.
Who's challenging?
We've got a group of us that are in this room, and maybe on Zoom as well too, called the Solid Waste Caucus. And we're kind of, how would you, Anybody want to volunteer a description of us?
Well, it's a group of neighbors who live surrounding the landfill, as well as environmental organizations, like the Sierra Club in Oxbow, which has its nature preserve quite close to this site.
And words, those of us that are involved are trying to assist those citizens in speaking up and objecting. And we're raising our awareness of how Ohio EPA has skipped a few steps, as in our opinion.
Can I add to that?
Yes,
It's also, all the different people that are on the solid waste caucus bring something different to the group, which I think is important, whether it's, a concern for environmental justice or a concern for the watershed. The Whitewater River watershed is going to be highly affected if this dump expands as planned. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in it. We meet every Tuesday, normally at noon via Zoom. So just let us know if you're interested. We could use more perspective and more help.
everybody that's on the solid waste caucus, raise your hand. There you go. So look them up at the end of that meeting. Yes, question.
How profitable is the expansion of this solid waste movement?
That's a good question, and I have no way of answering
There
that.
must be some money in it.
There's a lot of money in it, and it's more money than recycling. Let's put it that way. I did a study about 20 years ago. Recycling in most cities is lower cost than solid waste collection. And by that very nature, less profitable to recyclers. Because the service fees are lower for recycling, and the service fees are higher for trash collection. And the tolerance of municipalities across the country to pay for trash collection is higher than it is for recycling collection. So to give you an example, Indianapolis has not moved forward with a curbside recycling program. And they pay $20 a month for private waste collection. And they brag how low that is. But the latest proposal was $4 a month curbside recycling collection. And that was rejected as being too costly. So you have a bias against paying for recycling across the country, yet trash collection gets a free pass. So there's money in trash collection. How much, I don't know. And there's cost in every time you drive a truck down the road and collect it with staff, there's cost. And I've operated trash collection and I've operated recycling collection for the city of Austin. I know the cost, and I know the break evens and such and such, but for the entire industry, I don't know the answer to that.
If I can add Cincinnati as a perspective on that, in city of Cincinnati, both trash and recycling are provided by the municipality,
Yeah.
so they're free to residents. But the last time that the city considered eliminating the curbside recycling program for economic reasons, we ran the numbers on it. The total cost of recycling is about $125 a ton, but the total cost of trash collection is about $150 a ton. So we were able to show them that it was cheaper to run the recycling program than to eliminate it.
And a lot of people, thank you, Larry, what a lot of people don't realize is when you drop a recycling program, where does that material go? Goes into the trash collection.
It's the same tonnage, it's just where you pick it up.
The tonnage does not disappear, but you have to pick it up in the trash collection then.
I have the distinct impression that if there have been any real studies of the true cost of dealing with these materials, it's not being incorporated at the regulatory level or the legislative.
To raise your point, there's externalities. that are not being charged at the point of collection. And I totally agree.
And I'm sure there are people who could put a pretty good number to it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's hidden in the framework. I totally agree. And part of those externalities is the pollution that we pay for living near landfills. Yeah, I do want to go through the slides. I will take I think you probably have one more question. Let's go through the slides. Yeah.
Composting, how does that involve in here? You know, in places, people pick up all the compost and take it to a central composting. I do it in my own backyard, but that's by my own choice. And my garbage is going down to this much, because I've diverted most of it. But I have to do it on my own. It would be much easier if I could just put it at the curb.
Composting significantly reduces the load of material going to the landfill and reduces the pollution exhibited from a landfill for two reasons. One, you got less material collected at the curb for the landfill, so less pollution in the process of collection for landfilling. But secondly, part of the pollution from a landfill is the methane emissions from the yard waste and food waste that's coming from households. And if we can compost that material, we have far, far less pollution coming from a landfill. A landfill still will pollute, but that is the biggest harm of a landfill is the food waste and compostable material that's going to a landfill. And many states are prohibiting that material from going to the landfill. But how do you move the citizens in the right direction towards composting? How do you get those collection programs up and running? California leads the charge, but we're not living like that. California providing that service, and we don't have that kind of money. Most California cities provide 3 carts at the curb: a trash cart, a recycling cart, and a composting cart.
Well, Boulder, Colorado does that as well. That's how I learned about curbside composting.
Colorado leads the charge too.
My friend doesn't even put
Minnesota
out
too.
garbage anymore. She has a little sack that she puts out every month. So she recycles and composts it.
Yeah.
And nothing's going in the garbage.
Reduces the cost of landfill, that's for sure. Yeah.
California doesn't deal with the huge number of homeless people.
Well, they do on the coastline, but not. I would say that's the debatable issue there. But you know, what California does is they help subsidize their cities with trash collection and recycling collection. And when I ran the recycling program in Fresno, I got a rebate check of about $500,000 a year. Not $500,000, $250 million a year. Let me put it that way. Or am I in $500,000? I don't know. $250 million a year rebate check to the city of Fresno every year from the state. That's just one city. You know, out of 500 cities across the state. They're subsidizing recycling because they want it to happen. That's not happening in Ohio. Let me move forward here. US EPA allows each state to create municipal solid waste regulations as long as they are not weaker. That's what the feds say. Okay, that's what the feds say. Landfill operators must abide by federal, state, and local regulations. Ohio EPA is the enforcer of federal and state regulations. State regulations do not weaken citizen rights. That's the main line I want to present to you. State regulations do not weaken citizen rights. Move forward. Yeah. So local solid waste district regulations. I don't want to get into too much detail because I want to move on here. But the local solid waste district rules can be downloaded. You can take a look at them. There's a little bit of history about moving forward with more robust citizen rights in the commissioner's court. Those rules were diluted, I would say, through a Rumpke lawsuit, and the diluted rules are now downloaded at that website and in place because the Hamilton County decided to settle out of court with Rumpke and reduce basically citizens' rights to a challenge to any new landfills that might be cited. Our consideration, those of us that fought the fight on that issue, is that we believe that there will be a need for a replacement of the Coleraine Rumpke landfill in the next decade. And so there will be an issue of where in Hamilton County will be the next siting of a landfill. Where?
But aren't they just expanding it?
They're out of expansions laterally, and they're out of height. They're beyond their height restrictions. That they have nowhere else to go with that landfill. And given the latest estimates, I've seen 13 to 15 years estimate. It takes 10 years to build a new landfill. 8 to 10 years to build a new landfill. Within the next 5 years, they have to start looking for a new site. So where? And that's where we need to start educating our citizens on the resistance to a landfill. Next slide. And I talked about the significantly modified rules, the revised rules are disadvantaged to public citizens. Go ahead, next slide. This is where I wanted to get to sooner than now. Next slide. Defects in landfill liners, gas collection, leachate collection, groundwater monitoring, landfill design and siting. Now we get to the meat of the matter. Next slide. The landfill liners, upper component must meet a minimum 30 millimeter flexible membrane liner. There's an intent to use this type of language. What is 30 millimeters? It's the thickness of a credit card. And the lower component must consist of 2 foot layer of compacted soil. We know what 2 feet is, but it's compacted soil. And and I have seen landfills constructed in this way, and I have seen material on a heavy rainstorm seep through this type of a liner. The flexible liner is an HDPE, high density polyethylene, and I've seen it directly installed, and it's supposed to be uniform contact with a compacted soil. That's their terminology. I've seen trucks drive over it, which puncture this plastic material, and then they put waste on top of it. It's punctured plastic. It's just, I see, let me look at this over here. This is a plastic liner bag right here. The liners they use on landfills is about 3 times thicker than this bag right here. I won't call it a hefty bag for other reasons, but that plastic bag as a trash bag is a particular thickness. I couldn't tell you the thickness of it, but it is the landfill liners that I have seen installed are about 3 times thicker than that. That is not very thick at all. And the trucks they use, the compactor trucks they use to drive over and dispose of waste, puncture that plastic, guaranteed, every landfill. That's fine. So these liner regulations originated in 1976, and they have not been strengthened. And in essence, they've been reduced because the original regulations had 4 foot layer of compacted soil, and now it's 2 foot compacted soil. And the original regulation said double flexible membrane liner, and now it says a single flexible membrane line. So it's pretty easy and I know 30 milliliter, that's 1/32 of an inch is the thickness of a credit card. Next slide. A well-quoted study notes the failure, and every landfill operator has been sent this study. They're aware of this study. It notes the typical causes of failure of the landfill bottom liners bad geomembrane seams as they seam it. This is a picture of them laying down the membrane over compacted soil, and bad seams or poor clay compaction, installation damage, that's the trucks driving over the top of it, not safeguarding the liner in operation, pipes penetrating the liner like leachate collection or methane collection, clogging the leachate collection and removal system, geotechnical failure, unanticipated chemical attacks, leach from your household chemicals can attack this pretty easily. And the breach by vertical pipes. Next slide. So defects in the gas collection, and you can see in the upper corner some gas collection pipes there. Methane gas generated by the facility does not exceed 25% of the lower explosive limit for methane in facility structures. That's a recent regulation. It's kind of a obnoxious, vague description of regulation that's hard to interpret. Older regulations were more clear and stronger. This is kind of a weakened description, and this is from federal regulations, 40 CFR, and it's actually hard to enforce this because you have to go out in the field and measure the explosive limit of methane based on humidity, temperature, and airflow, and then decide what the 25% of the lower explosive limit is. So it's relative to the local conditions and very hard to enforce.
What happens if it blows up?
If it blows up, you'll know by the community losing their homes.
It's kind of like the Palestine train rail
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
It's never gonna happen, it's never gonna happen, let's lower regulation, it isn't gonna be a big deal. And then that massive destruction occurred.
I believe what you're saying is true for every landfill in Ohio. I believe this standard is extremely difficult to measure and is not enforceable. And I believe methane is of the biggest concern for every landfill in Ohio, for the reasons you just stated. Yeah.
And is there also leakage into our groundwater through these?
Generally not for the gas collection. It's generally the leakage is generally upward bound, and the UN climate talks that are going on this week have been talking about control of methane. Methane collection has been discussed for collection for gas and oil industries, but they are now focusing on landfills as a major leakage of gas into the atmosphere. And so you'll see a lot more scrutiny on landfill measurement of gas as well as controls of gas controls.
Question I have is has to do with landfills that have been long abandoned. There's one right down the hill here, just across the Mill Creek, along Winton Road. And it has been capped, with some various materials. But there's a lot of nasty stuff in there that nobody's dealt with yet.
And you raise a good point that the US EPA and the Ohio EPA generally view that methane production from an old landfill decreases over time and disappears before the overall closure of a landfill. Studies have shown that to be completely inaccurate. Studies show that the generation of methane continues for about 50 years. And it's the compression of the waste as water penetrates into the landfill. It depends on the capping and the maintenance of the closure of the landfill. And is that capping sufficient? And is the landfill being monitored properly? And is water penetrating into that landfill? And if water is penetrating, methane's gonna be produced. So, next slide, yeah. Rumpke has been noted, I'm particularly gonna pick on the Rumpke chlorine landfill on this slide here. Rumpke has been noted, thank you. Rumpke has been noted as an extremely large emitter of landfill gas through a US EPA report released by NPR. The Rumpke chlorine landfill released 49,000 metric tons of methane in 2019, according to the released US EPA report. Not in the NPR report, but in another study that I had read, and I can't quote who stated it. That's the largest landfill emitter in the US is where I read it, but I can't find that particular source, so I apologize there. But this was in an NPR report, 49,000 metric tons of methane in 2019. Rumpke collects methane at the chlorine landfill and then cleans it and puts it into a gas line for resale. So given that they collect and resell methane, why are they emitting into the atmosphere 49,000 metric tons of methane in 2019? And doing so more than any other landfill in the country.
There's some regulation about how much they're allowed to release?
There is no upper limit to allowance. There's the US EPA has never given an upper limit of allowance.
So it's up to the federal government to go around and say, you shouldn't be doing this, but we're not doing that because of the EPA.
I think what's going to happen in the next 12 months is the US, it's going to depend on Congress, but US EPA is going to react to some of the UN climate talks on methane control and propose some regulations on methane and on the industries releasing methane, including landfills.
We can pray. This gentleman had a question.
Go ahead, question. Yeah, Mike.
Well, I had the question, but you said it. This is vagrant methane in excess of what's captured.
This is unmitigated releases to the atmosphere.
But admittedly, it isn't that easy to capture.
Yeah, I have managed the closure of 3 landfills where methane collection is very important on the closure of the landfills. It is absolutely impossible for any landfill to completely capture every bit of methane being released. You've got acres of land, and unless you put a geodesic dome over it, you really can't. So I'm getting close on my time, and so we got to spin through some of this slides.
Take some more time, quick. It's 10 more minutes.
Yeah, given my time, let's move along here. Okay, yeah, but thank you. So next slide. I know you're engaged. and this is the slide on methane collection that talks about four phases of the landfill, and phase 4 is really the closure of the landfill, and you can see that nitrogen goes down, but carbon dioxide and methane are really at a high level of releases. Next slide. And I note the UN environmental program and their concern about reaching 1.5 degrees Celsius. And methane, the primary component of natural gas, is responsible for more than 25% of the warming we're experiencing today. That's from EDF. And methane is a very powerful gas. Methane is responsible for around half of the growth in ozone formation, which is a potent local air issue locally. So next slide. I think I'm preaching to the choir on that issue. And the Paris Agreement cannot be achieved without reducing methane emissions by 40 to 45% by 2030. There are many different ways to reduce methane emissions, but you can't reach that kind of reduction without dealing with landfills. You gotta deal with the landfill issue to reach those emissions. That bottom line, the US is among more than 100 countries that have pledged to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030. 2030 is only 6 years away. Next slide. Okay, leachate. Leachate means the liquid that has passed through or emerged from solid waste and can be soluble, suspended, or miscible materials removed from the waste. It's contaminated water, basically. And this can result in leachate contaminating nearby water sources, further damaging local ecosystems. And this is a common concern of local citizens that live in an area of a landfill. Landfills are required to collect leachate before it leaves its property. It has to be collected and has to be processed through a wastewater treatment plant. Next slide. The leachate collection system must be designed to keep the depth of the leachate over the liner, the bottom liner, less than 30 centimeters. So there's a measurement there. The leachate cannot accumulate very high, 30, not more than 30 centimeters over the lower. That's a federal regulation, 40 CFR. Go ahead, next slide. So there's dead zones that happen in an aquatic situation when leachate leaches into local streams and local waterways. I have seen many landfills in my career where the local streams have leachate what we call leachate breakouts, where a side of a hill of a landfill above the local level of the soils, reaching a breakout, and the leachate comes flowing out and goes into a local stream, local creek. I've seen that many times, and you get dead zones, lack of oxygen, and fish kills, lots of fish kills. And that can happen around a local landfill. Like leachate contamination is one of the things that local citizens need to really be on the watch out for. And what do you do when you see a leachate breakout? What do you do when you see leachate contaminating a local water stream? Contact the local health department and get them out there immediately. No stall. Not 5 days later, not 7 days later, get them out there within 24 hours.
How do you recognize it, Bob? How do you recognize leachate?
A polluted type of water. It's not clear water. It's not blue, clear water coming out from the side of a hill. And really stenchy water coming out of a hillside, and that hillside is owned by the landfill. That's leachate. It smells. It really smells bad. Yeah. So leachate contamination of local waterways is often monitored by local environmental groups, but off-site activity is rarely monitored by landfill operators. Landfill operators will immediately tell you, it's not on my property, I am not responsible. That is their first knee-jerk reaction. But leachate breakouts come from their landfill. They are responsible. Next slide. Groundwater regulations, same thing, same concept, but not leachate. It's just clean water from a heavy rainstorm. How many 100-year rainfalls have we had in Cincinnati? And so much so that the Weather Bureau is not calling them 100-year rainfalls anymore. You know, those heavy rainfalls take a bit of a devastation to landfill management. It is hard to manage a landfill with very, very heavy rain. And I am not sympathetic to the landfill operator. I'm just telling you, there's a lot of runoff. There's a lot of runoff on the top of the landfill. And that landfill runoff must be controlled. Every landfill operator has to control their landfill so that water does not run off their landfill. Next slide. And they also have to assess the quality of their underground water aquifer to make sure they're not contaminating their aquifer. So water testing must be tested annually for the aquifer. So local residents have the ability to test the water aquifer around the landfill, off the landfill property, and just monitor the aquifer over years and years and years, and see if there's any contaminants that are happening over time. Time testing is very important for monitoring a landfill for an aquifer, because sand seams and issues with a landfill can contaminate an underground aquifer, but it happens over time. And if you can document certain water quality on a certain date, and then 10 years later, that aquifer is polluted, you can possibly pin the finger at the landfill, but that takes a bit of strength in water testing. Next slide. Most landfills fail to note any downgraded surface and groundwater monitoring. So that's an insistence in building a landfill, expanding a landfill. Citizens can insist on monitoring that the landfill operator monitor downgradient, that they monitor the property line on the downgradient surface and groundwater monitoring. Next slide. Yeah, I mentioned this before, public airports, floodplains, wetlands. I mentioned this before. Next slide. Yeah, I think I mentioned this before. Let's go on to the next slide. This is a nice picture of an overview of the construction of a landfill, if you're interested in that. And siting criteria requires the protection of groundwater, drinking water wells, setbacks from parks, surface waters, property lines, domiciles, that's their term for residents and people's living quarters. Next slide. Want to get back to the earthquake seismic zones. Cincinnati's in the Anna seismic zone, where there have been recorded 170 earthquakes between 1776 and 2008. That's a wide time period. But it's not that frequent per year here. But because we're in a seismic zone, there's landfill regulations because of the seismic zone. It restricts the height of a landfill, and there's construction and design of a landfill. So that's an interesting note. Next slide. This is the seismic area, and the seismic zone, and all of greater Cincinnati, including northern Kentucky, are included in the Anna seismic zone. So any landfill within the circumference of these circles here are affected by the Anna seismic zone, and therefore that is an issue in the construction of any landfill. Next slide. So last part, and I do want to make sure we get some finer points here. I'm stretching my time, I know. Landfill alternatives. Next slide. So moving into some of our really more advanced topics, anybody that's involved in protesting local landfill issues is challenged by, well, we've got waste, where are they going to put it? You know, we got to have landfills, and the answer is in these slides. So go ahead, next slide. So we're in a linear economy, resource extraction, production, distribution, consumption, waste. That's where we've been for the last few centuries, and we've got to move away from that. Next slide. We've got to move into a circular economy. We've got to redesign our products. Many of you may feel like we're not into product design. What is products? Is we asked about earlier, and we're not into product design. Well, many factories in Cincinnati are into product design. There are dozens of factories in Cincinnati, and hundreds, maybe thousands of employees in Cincinnati that produce products and design products. And we need to talk to those companies in Cincinnati to green their design, and become more recyclable, more reused, more compostable. That's part of the message there. Next slide. And moving from linear to recycling economy to circular economy. Next slide. And I mentioned that earlier. Next slide. So the US has an extractive industrial disposal model. We need to move to a climate-friendly economy, such as a circular economy, and we redefine growth. We redefine our economy to materials use and focus on waste reduction as positive society-wide benefits. We generally define waste reduction as a negative. We need to define it as a positive. And sustainable material management is more equitable and is built on the first two R's. Remember in your grade school years, remember way back in your grade school years, the three R's, the three R's. The three R's are reduce, reuse, and recycle. But when we got into integrated waste management, we jumped to recycle and say, oh, we're recycling. I've spent 45 years promoting recycling, so I'm into that recycling, you know? But we skipped over reduce and reuse. And sustainable materials management really gets us strong into reduce and reuse. Waste reduction, thinking about what we consume and packaging and products at the home base, reducing our waste flow. Look at what we put into the trash can and reducing our waste flow, and then seeing what we can reuse. Next slide.
And refuse.
And refuse, thank you. Refuse at the store, packaging. Yeah, that's hard, but I try. That's a challenge. So I think I define sustainable materials management, but it represents a change in how our society thinks about the use of natural resources and environmental protection. We need to get that vocabulary in our mind and start thinking about it. Next slide. So zero waste is a new term too. And we need to get that thought in our mind, in our habits, in our at home, and at work, at school. And it means that all discarded materials are designed from the beginning to become resources for others to use. So when we use that cup or that can or that bottle and we're done with it, it needs to have a second life. It shouldn't automatically go to the landfill. It needs to have a second life, and it needs to be designed that way from the beginning. And we need to work on conserve and recover all resources and not burn or bury them. Burying is the landfill. Burning is the incinerator. Next slide. I won't bury you with these statistics, but we're into materials management. If the main point of this is 75% of this pie chart is recyclable or reusable, 75%. Next slide. Green Cincinnati plan, beautiful plan. It's a wonderful. It's been recently upgraded to 2018 plan, upgraded to 2023, and these are a few bullet points from the 2023 plan. Increase waste diversion 10% by 2028. Now, that 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but that's starting from our current position and moving 10% more. And that means challenging every resident to more recycling and more composting. Sustainably diverting 50% of organics, including yard trimmings and food waste, from the landfill by 2028. 2028 is only 4 years away. And we need to start building the infrastructure for organics collection to do that. And decrease litter and illegal dumping by 10% annually through 2028. I like this because it's ratcheting it up. 10% this year, 10% next year, 10% the next year. I like the ratcheting. But I can tell you, I paid staff in Austin to pick up litter in Austin. And the mayor would come up to me and say, "This is the cleanest city I've ever seen." And I said, I challenge you. I challenged the mayor. I said, "Come at 5 a.m. with me to tour the downtown streets." And he did. He was absolutely amazed how dirty and littered those streets were at 5 a.m. And I said, "I pay 25 employees to pick up these streets so that by 7 a.m. every street is clean." And he says, "Good job." And I said, is it worth 25 employees, 7 days a week to pick up this litter? And he says, we need to stop this litter. And I said, let's do a litter, anti-litter campaign. Yeah. People shouldn't be littering. They cost too much, you know, and he said, bring me the cost calculations to city council next week, and I did. It's just astronomical how much we pay to pick up litter. It's just astronomical. We need to stop the litter. Next slide. So community rights, I'm real close to the end here. Community rights. This is where you need to pick up your rights and not ignore them. If you're living near a landfill or you have a relative near a landfill, excess blown litter in a landfill is outrageous. You shouldn't live with it. Absolutely a no-go. Truck traffic concerns in a neighborhood near a landfill. Noise and odor from landfill operations. Groundwater runoff not contained. Leachate in local creeks and rivers. Methane releases in local area of landfill. Truck spillovers or truck accidents. We read about it in the paper quite frequently. These are local residents being impacted. Chemical hazardous spills. These are rights to protest these issues. Every resident has the right. And if you don't live near a landfill, help protect the citizens near a landfill. Next slide. Community rights. Citizens have the right to a litter-free, noise-free, odor-free neighborhood. Once you say that for your own neighborhood, whether you live near a landfill or not, think about the people who live near a landfill. Remember that the neighborhoods generally were there before the landfill expansions. Citizens should attend public hearings and protest landfill sightings, expansions, and modifications. Your voice should be heard. Work together as a large group, communicate and coordinate. Let's work together. Next slide. You can file complaints to your local health department. And they're right up the street from here. They're right up the street from here on William Howard Path. Next slide. You can file complaints to your state environmental agency, Ohio EPA, and there's the Southwest District Office in Dayton. You can even walk in their door and talk to them and file complaints. Next slide. Alternatives to landfill. There are many alternatives, but I give you the top 3. Reduce your reliance on landfill, waste reduction, reuse and recycle at homes, work, and school. Sounds basic, hard to do, please do. Protest the Hefty Renew program. If you've heard about it, I forgot to bring my flyers that I said I was going to bring. Hefty Renew program is a new program promoted by Rumpke to buy these orange bags, put in these expansive amount of plastics, and then put them on the top of your recycling bin, and they'll come and pick it up. This is, we are protesting it because it's an equity issue, because it's costing 50 cents a bag. You're expanding your use of plastics. You're buying a plastic bag to recycle your plastics, and there's no assurance that these plastics are going to get recycled. They may end up in an incinerator or a plastics to oil program, and we're not assured by Rumpke of the end usage of these plastics.
What does Rumpke say they're gonna do?
They don't. They don't answer the question.
Welcome to capitalism.
Yeah.
Hydro blocks.
Hydro blocks is the latest standard. The city of Cincinnati asked, Sue Magnus, city of Cincinnati, asked what they're going to do with it. And they said it might end up in a plant in Pennsylvania to build hydro blocks. And they showed her an example of it. It's not on Rumpke's website on the Renew program that it's going to end up as a hydro block, but that's the answer that was given to Sue Magnus. Hydro block is a 100% recycled plastic block that they put in the ground to water flow and underground water flow, like drainage pipes, agricultural drainage pipes. The concern we have is PFAS and other types of plastic contaminants, maybe microplastics, that might be penetrating the soil as water is beating up against these hydroblocks.
But the idea is to collect recyclables that are not collected right now,
Exactly.
and then do something.
Yeah, the idea is to collect plastics that are not in the normal recycling bin and put them in these orange black. Our answer is to take them to the Cincinnati Recycling and Reuse Hub. And the Cincinnati Recycling and Reuse Hub takes every item that's on their orange bag list. And more. And the Reuse Hub takes a fantastically large list of items for reuse. And you can look on their website. And please do use their website for the hours of collection and their location.
Yes, please.
Has noted to me that they collect everything that's on that list.
A little bit, Bob, you said, they promised, or they said they might be used to, is that the best answer they can give?
That's the best answer. Yes.
Yeah.
They are elusive. They are elusive on what they're going to do with the plastics. Yes.
Are you aware of any economists or other professionals looking at the possibility of assessing the net cost of the full extent of a product or packaging at the time of manufacture of packaging and charging a levy, call it a reserve if you wish, against which those costs would be accrued?
We are leading to a new topic called EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. And New York State, Colorado, California, and a few other states are exploring state legislation where EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, they assess a fee to the manufacturer for the collection, the end collection of these plastics or packaging or any other item for the secondary reuse or recycling from consumers. Yeah, and it's been a nightmare trying to do the economics, as you might imagine.
The nice thing about this also, if that cost is occurring at the opening, event, the process, it's going to be in the price of things you buy in the store.
Yes.
And you're going to make decisions based on that.
I totally agree. When they get into the extended producer responsibility discussions at state legislatures and they do the economics, they find a very high cost in the recovery of the material and they start questioning, what are we doing to our environment? Why is it so costly to recover this material? And where does it go and why does it end up in the landfill? And some give up on the topic, some explore it in more depth. New York State deferred the issue this year to next year when they have a study commission. Colorado actually passed a law on EPR. And it's a pretty good law. But we'll see in the test how they implement it. We'll see about the implementation.
I want to bring this close to an end right now, but thank you. I want to thank you so much. We could continue to. Very important. We got into happy bags to at the end. Yeah, it's good. We need to know about that. Thank you. Thank you. Continue to ask questions, but right now it's just it's officially at the end.
Officially at the end. But I will answer more questions.
Some states require a deposit bottle.
Yes, Steve asked the question that some states require a deposit on bottles. There are 10 states across the country that have what we call traditionally bottle bills or deposit states. The nonprofit that I'm working with, the National Recycling Coalition, is pushing for a national bottle bill that would work with all 50 states. And that's going to be introduced next year. Congress is a little tough. Don't know if it's going to pass through Congress next year. But we're working on it. We're working on some sponsors, for that. We'll see. But what a deposit bill does is it takes beverage containers and puts a nickel or a dime on it. People pay for that at the grocery store and they get the nickel or dime back when they return it. Not necessarily at the grocery store, but at a redemption center. And then that guarantees the bottles get recycled. It's a very good system, works in many different states. Michigan's the closest state, deposit state that we have. Michigan's recycling rate of the deposit bottles and cans is 72%. Of the containers that are affected by that legislation. Pretty good. Any other questions?
The European Union has had for more than a decade a regulation that bans organic material from landfills. You cannot put food in a landfill in Europe.
Yep.
What's your take on that system? Does it work? Should we be emulating it?
I love that regulation. It is totally unenforced in major cities like London and Paris and other cities. Paris tried to enforce it. They ended up with a lot of food waste at the curb with vendors that couldn't take it. They didn't have the infrastructure. They still don't have the infrastructure, the composting centers. Some of the Belgium, Switzerland, they have fantastic composting facilities, anaerobic digesters. Some of the countries are doing a great job. It's just some of the major cities where it's applied. In mostly in Eastern Europe. Western Europe, I think they're doing a great job. What's driving the picture is the law that you quoted, that you're banning food waste in the landfill. And the motivator that the EU Commission had was methane releases from the landfill. That was their motivator.
Bob, I lived in Germany for a while and they have a cultural aversion to waste.
Yeah.
They've been living in circular economy
Yeah.
for a long time. They have something I would love to see in Cincinnati is every once a month, everybody take their old cars or clothes or something, put it down on the curb. Everybody go around and look at it and rummage through it and scavenge it.
Germany and most cities, they have a once a month yard sale. And it's not really a sale, it's freebies.
It's
Yeah.
circular.
Yeah, it's circular, it's wonderful. And they also have a green dot program and administered by the German government. And the package is for packaging. So packaging is our worst enemy here in the US. And it's plastic packaging. In Germany, you can't produce and use a package from a producer unless it gets the green dot from the German government, and it has to meet certain environmental standards, including reuse and recycling standards. So it's a pretty tough standard to get the green dot. Something for us to consider here in the US.
Styrofoam is big.
Styrofoam is non-recyclable and hardly reusable. It's a challenge to even consider reusing styrofoam. It's a product that should be banned. I belong to a group called the US Plastic Pack. US Plastic Pack has 200 members, including plastic manufacturers, and they have decided on 20. Right now, 11 items, but they're trying to expand it to 22 items that will be eliminated from US distribution by 2025, which is not far away. These items of you can find it on their website, US Plastic Pack, PACT. And the items for elimination include styrofoam and plastic cutlery. The plastic spoons and plastic knives and plastic forks, that's on the list too. The plastic lids on carry-out cups, that's on the list too. So they have agreed to work towards and implement a list of 11 items to be banned from distribution in the US by 2025. And another 11 items they're working on in the back corners for ban by 2030. still working on that list.
Interesting aspect of Eastern Europe, the fact that it was so much under the influence of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, very little packaging was ever produced. If you wanted to buy, say, lemonade.
That's a interesting
You take
point.
your container, get it out of the barrel and got there.
So they had less wasteful society from decades before. That's an interesting history perspective there. Yeah, I had not known that.
Well, I spent a good deal of time there.
Yeah, yeah. And Western Europe's trying to catch up. Yes,
In Toronto, they collect garbage every other week and they pick up compost and recycle every week.
yeah, you're right. Toronto picks up waste every other week and the alternate week, they pick up recycling and composting. And I saw that model and tried to implement it in Austin when I was working in Austin. And so I was the director of solid waste and recycling. And I would pass through ordinances in Austin through city council just like that, pretty easy. So I went forward with an ordinance to city council and said, I would save money, the city would save money if we did waste collection every other week, just like Toronto. And I gave them a PowerPoint on how Toronto does it. And I got flat out no's across the board from city council. They were not ready for that.
Toronto has a cool climate. Your garbage is gonna rot in Austin.
Yeah. I think that might be the main difference. But you know, they just weren't ready for that radical change.
So you can compost, produce food that has spices on it. It's not a problem.
No, not a problem. The spices are not a problem in composting. Composting has its challenges with meats if you are backyard composting. But in commercial composting, meats are not a problem at all. Meats and fats are not a problem in the commercial composting world. Some dairy product, I've heard dairy products are a little bit of a problem in backyard composting, and not a problem in commercial composting. Not at
The
all.
difference is bigger piles get hotter
Bingo.
and a hotter temperature breaks the stuff down.
Bingo. And they can also, they're more on a 90-day cycle. I don't know about backyard compost. In my backyard, I'm more on a 300-day cycle. But commercial dealers do a 90-day cycle, and they do turn the piles, I don't know, maybe every 30 days or so, or more frequently. And they do get those piles hot. They do. Yeah.
You know, Rumpke does compost wood chips and lawn materials.
Yes.
On concrete, and they've been doing that.
Yes.
For 30 years now.
Yeah, I think they even piloted doing wood pallets, but they got away from that because it's hard to test the chemicals on wood pallets. But they do the chips and some of the compostable materials. They do not remove food waste and yard waste on the delivered loads from residential areas, because that's really tough. Once it's delivered to the landfill, it's really tough to remove from the trucks. Yeah. Back there, yes.
The last time I was at the recycling and reuse center, they did take styrofoam. What do they do?
Yeah. Yeah,
What do they do with it?
there's a dealer in just north of Kings Island. I'm trying to remember the name of the dealer. They take the styrofoam, compress it, and make picture frames out of it. So there is a product made. And I've talked to Colleen about it. At the very least, there's a product made, so they collect it and they send it to the dealer, and something's being done with it. I am a skeptic of that because I consider that a wasteful product. You can find those wood frames at Dollar General. They're $1.50, $2 frames. they fall apart fairly easily. It's a discardable type frame. And it's not a durable product. And the argument on one side is we're getting rid of our styrofoam in a positive way and the product's being made. On the negative side, we're making junk products out of it. And is that something that we should be promoting? So
until we eliminate styrofoam from the United States, what are we supposed to do with it?
yeah, the US Plastic Pack is working with the European Plastic Pack, the Canadian Plastic Pack, and the Mexican Plastic Pack, and in uniform, working to eliminate styrofoam. So that's not the whole world, but that's a pretty significant uniform effort. Among, and the plastic packs that I mentioned, those are manufacturers of plastics, and they are in semi-agreement. We're kind of pushing them along.
If you like the recycle reuse hub that we have, it seems to be really working well, lots of volunteers. It really is a movement toward changing our culture around the tyranny of plastic and knowing exactly what's going on with it. But I think our vice mayor is very interested in trying to get public funding for that. And so we could maybe make several around the city.
Yeah, some hubs, that's why they're called a hub, because they want to create a series of hubs around the city.
So we just
And they need funding. Yeah,
need to push that
Yeah.
at city council.
yes,
Yeah, one thing that people might not realize, that are here, or even just people in the city, is that the city of Cincinnati only provides free recycling to single-family homes and apartments of 4 units or less. So if you think about all the apartment buildings that have 500 to 500 units, those people do not get free recycling. And that's a problem, and it amounts to over 50% of the population of the city does not have access to curbside recycling.
that's a good point, and I would also argue that there is no free recycling in the city. I would argue that it's no charge to the single family households, but it is a cost to the city budget, to the tax. It is, there's cost to run in a recycling program. It's not free, but my apologies to Larry there, but in 45-year career of recycling, I always try to work on terminology, and nothing's free. There's no free lunch. So recycling costs money, trash collection costs money. I lean towards recycling collection. Reuse costs money. Colleen knows that, running a reuse hub. Reuse costs money. Where do we dedicate our resources to help save the planet? Where do we put our resources? That's my question.
Any answers?
We either pay now or we pay later.
We pay now or we pay later. I'd rather pay now than pay later.
Well, my kids will pay later.
Yeah.
We don't want them to pay, right? You don't have kids, so you don't worry about that.
My kids, I have 3 kids, and they're beating me up saying it's the baby boom generation that created this crisis. So I'm doing my best to kind of help solve this problem. So I think we're wrapping this up. I thank you very much. You've done a good job. Thank you very much.